And they wanted me to go down through the clouds and do a recce run of these tanks. And I'm thinking, this is exactly the sort of thing I teach people never to do. And so I am just screaming. I am right below the Mach, maybe 550 miles an hour over this lake. And I hit the road, picture a black background, and then all of a sudden multicolored explosions everywhere. Okay, it was every piece of AAA and every shoulder launch SAM and everything else. What I had found was one of the divisions of the Republican Guard. They opened up with everything that they could. And I thought, I'm a dead man.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we hear the combat story of Lieutenant Colonel retired Dan Two Dogs Hampton, a career F-16 fighter pilot who flew 151 combat missions from the first Gulf War to Kosovo to Operation Iraqi Freedom over a 20-year career. He's a fighter pilot to the core who earned 4 DFCs and 8 Air Medals with Valor, and is a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Fighter Weapons School and Navy's Top Gun. Dan's experience hunting SAMs and flying 500 knots below 300 feet give a surreal perspective of life inside the cockpit, as do his lighthearted post-flight activities that we've come to know and love from the fighter community. Since retiring from service, Dan has written several bestsellers, including Viper Pilot, Lords of the Sky, and The Mercenary. His most recent book, Operation Vengeance, came out in late 2020. I hope you enjoy his combat stories as much as I did. Hey Dan, thanks for taking the time to share your story today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Ryan.
So I just finished up Viper Pilot, great book. And as I mentioned, as we were communicating to schedule this, I don't think anybody could have ever pegged you as anything but a fighter pilot. I'm curious, if we go back to you as a little kid, what was the spark for you for aviation? Was it ingrained in you from an early age? Did you see something in flight? Where did that come from?
Girls. No, my father and grandfather were both Marine pilots. But to my dad's credit, he was in no way like the great Santini. He never pressured us in any way, shape, or form. And I actually didn't have much interest in the military until I was about halfway through college. I wanted to be an architect. And in fact, that's what I studied. I'd been flying, though, privately since I was 15. So I'd always been into aviation, but I wasn't really interested in the military. And then you remember the 80s. I mean, that was kind of the heyday of the military. The Cold War was wrapping up. And of course, you had all the cool movies. And I remember thinking one day in the summer when I was halfway through college, I bet flying a jet fighter is a lot cooler than sitting here at a desk drawing houses and country clubs. And so, like you did, I went through the whole commissioning and down the path and all the merry hoops you have to jump through to be a military pilot.
When you talked to your dad or your grandfather, I'm not sure if he was still alive when you joined up, but what were their thoughts as you said, hey, I'm actually going to go this direction?
My grandfather had already died. My dad was very proud. He thought I was a sissy for going into the Air Force instead of the Marines. No, not really. In fact, he told me, he said, look, if all you want to do is fly airplanes, then go into the Air Force, because during Vietnam, it still incenses him to this day. They were going to pull qualified carrier fighter pilots off of aircraft carriers, Marines, and make infantry officers out of them because all the lieutenants were getting killed. And it really, really chapped him that the Marines thought he was more valuable as an infantry officer than he was as a carrier qualified attack pilot. And I think that stuck with him. So he said, join the Air Force if all you want to do is fly.
Damn.
That's ridiculous.
Wow. So and I know, and we'll get to this, some of the action you saw in the first Gulf War, was there a time as you were going through flight school that he was talking to you about his combat experiences from the air?
Well, he didn't really do that until after I'd finished. I think he was waiting to see if I'd make it. And like you, I'm sure it never crossed my mind to fail. I think if you go into aviation, especially military aviation, with the mindset that, hey, I could get killed doing this, or I'm going to fail, you are going to fail, or you're going to get killed doing it. It never crossed my mind. After I got out and went over to Europe, and then of course after the first Gulf War, we talked a little bit more. But you know yourself, Hollywood aside, you don't really talk about combat experiences with people that haven't actually been there or done that in some form or another, because nobody gets it, right?
Yeah.
There's no common frame of reference they always say, what was it like? Well, what am I going to say to you, that you would understand? I don't mean that in a demeaning way, but I mean, how would you put it in terms that people could understand? My dad did, so it was easy for us.
Yeah. My dad flew Hueys in Vietnam, so we kind of had something similar. And
Right.
I knew about it. I had seen the medals. He had a DFC or a Silver Star and a DFC, and so we talked about it a little bit. But then, kind of when I came back from Afghanistan, the conversations were just different at that point. So.
Right, and that's why, because until you've been there and seen the elephant, how are you going to speak to somebody else about it, except in general terms?
Right. Hey, so I'm glad you brought up the elephant, because I had not heard of that term until reading your book. So I'm really curious, is it an Air Force term? It might be military wide, but like, where did that come from, and what does it mean when you say it?
I think it's a fixed wing term. I know Hilo guys have their own language. You've got words you use that I hear it and I'm like, what does that mean? I think it's a fixed wing thing, and it goes back to, actually, I think I put this in the book, Hannibal crossing the Alps, bringing war elephants, into the Italian peninsula. Nobody had ever seen them before, so seeing an elephant became synonymous with seeing combat. And in our case, that's just, or some people say seeing the dragon. It's just something big and scary that you're not going to be able to describe until you've seen it face to face. So.
Yeah. For sure. So if we jump into flight school for you, Dan, one of the things that caught my eye that I also can't understand from the rotary wing side. So you kind of describe how the class ranking comes out. Top 3 guys get these jets. There's kind of like a below the line for non-jet aircraft, basically non-fighters. But there are a couple folks who are above the line who aren't going to a unit right away, and they make them instructor pilots. So to me, like, from the rotary wing side, the last human you want teaching you to fly is somebody who just came out of flight school, right? Like, you learn so much in your units. How is it that they go to train new students? It's just a different flight environment, maybe?
Yeah, and I think they still do it this way. I can't speak for how they do it now, but in those days, yeah, there was a class ranking, and the line was called the FAR line, Fighter Attack Reconnaissance. And everybody above that line, and this is an aggregate of all your flying, your academics, everything. Everybody above that line could go to Fighter Attack Reconnaissance aircraft. Everybody below the line goes to tanker, transports, or bombers. And the problem is, for the guys above the line, there's never enough fighters for the 5 or 6 guys in every class that are above the line. So 10% typically they get their first choice. If the guy who graduates first wants to go to a bomber, then he'll go to a bomber. Everybody I knew, the guys that graduated 1, 2, and 3, wanted to go to fighters. So they would take the 2 to 3 fighters that came down per class. And then everybody after them, but above that line, would go off and we call them FAPEs, first assignment IPs. And yeah, most of them, they're not the guys, you typically want, although the Air Force did it for a reason. They did it because there's never enough operational pilots to come back and fill all the pilot training instructor requirements. There's just not. They'd have to strip the operational units for that, and operational units take priority. So it's not a bad system, and those guys were always fairly closely supervised, and they would come back to the base that they went through pilot training from. So they would go off to Randolph to learn how to be a screaming instructor pilot, and then they'd come back to Vance or Del Rio or wherever, because that's the environment that they're familiar with, right? And of course, they'd come back to one of the 2 planes they flew in pilot training. So it's not quite as tenuous as it sounds, but I think they do the best with what they can.
Yeah. And then, so coming out of flight school, if you can take me to your first combat experience, which you really it's described so well in the book in the first Gulf War, but kind of like, where were you? What age were you? What was going through your mind? And if you could just take us through like that first trigger pull, that first flight in combat.
Sure. I was probably, let's see, by that time I was 25. I'm not sure about the Army system, but our pilot training takes a year. And then if you go to fighters, you have a bunch of other schools, survival schools and other flight schools you have to go to before you finally get to the fighter school that they're going to teach you how to fly an F-16. All of that takes about another year. And then when you get to an operational unit, it takes probably 3 to 4 months to become mission qualified. So you're looking at 2.5 years after you start, really, before you are a combat ready line fighter pilot. And you're a wingman, you're at the bottom of the totem pole, but you're there. And so I was fortunate. I had about 2 years in Europe, which was a great place to be a bachelor fighter pilot in 1990, before this war kicked off. And we were all supposed to, we were training to fight against the Soviet Union. That's what we set all of our nuke alerts on and everything else. And I knew where Iraq was, but I could have cared less. Nobody had even thought about it when that happened in 1990, when he invaded Kuwait. So we left right after Christmas of 1990, and we went to Turkey, which was good. We didn't go down south into Saudi Arabia. We got to go to Turkey, which was nice because they had an officers club and you could drink in Turkey. And, it wasn't the desert, which was a really good thing. And, we kind of landed, we had a few days to get our act together before the war started. And I just remember, without sounding too callous, I remember being tremendously excited. I was too young and inexperienced, to be too worried about it. I thought I was invincible, like you do, like most young pilots do.
Yep.
I was excited. I don't recall being nervous. Now, the first time I saw a surface-to-air missile come up off the ground, I remember looking at the plume of dust on the ground and thinking, somebody just crashed down there. And then all of a sudden my warning equipment went bananas, and then I could see the smoke trail, and then I could see the second, third, and fourth smoke trails. And I went, oh yeah, this is what they were talking about in training. Holy cow. And I wasn't really scared. I just reacted, kind of like you did, I'm sure. It wasn't until afterwards, when you come down and you debrief and you're alone with yourself, that you think, holy cow, I was 200 miles deep in enemy territory and 4 missiles just came at me. What happened? Right.
And actually, Dan, if I can interrupt for a sec, this is something I didn't know that I probably should have, but F-16s, I just assumed I'm going to sound naive here, that it was like another air-to-air fighter. And you really described this like SAM hunting profile of the F-16. Could you just speak to that briefly, like that mission set? Because it makes sense why we do it. It was news to me as I read the book.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about the F-16 is it does both. It's air-to-air, it's air-to-ground. The F-15s, the Gray Eagles, they just do air-to-air. The A-10s, they just do air-to-ground. And that's okay, but it's nice to have a multi-role, multi-mission fighter. And while weaseling, or suppression of enemy air defenses, was a subset of what we did. And in those days, and as still true today, you go to a wing that has that mission delineated, and you have to be specifically trained to go out and pick a fight with surface-to-air missiles and then kill them before they kill you. It's actually quite a lot of fun, but it takes a little bit of training beyond the normal air-to-ground stuff that every F-16 pilot knows. And so that was our job in Iraq, was to go in with the F-4Gs, the old remnants of Vietnam, and they would find the surface-to-air missiles and the radars with their guy in the back and their cosmic equipment. And then we would either shoot anti-radiation missiles at them, which I think are a waste of time, or we would drop bombs or shoot Mavericks or something else. It got a lot more interesting in the second Gulf War, but I'm sure you'll get to that.
Yeah. All right. So basically that the F4 is almost spotting for you, and then you're coming in to take the shot effectively.
Yeah, more or less. We flew in, they were called mixed pairs. So there was an F4, an F-16, F4, and an F-16. We usually go out in flights of 4. That way the two could split up if they needed to. And the F-16 was around to protect the F-4 from an air threat, if there was one, and to do the air to ground stuff, if they needed to. That particular F-4 didn't even carry a gun.
Wow.
It could launch anti-radiation missiles and a couple other things, but they didn't like to do it because there weren't that many of them left, and they didn't want to risk it. And they were on their way out anyway. You know, the F-4 had come out during Vietnam, and it was kind of old and tired, and it really couldn't react defensively against the newer surface-to-air missiles like the SA-8 and the SA-6.
So then jumping back into that fight, that first combat engagement you had, I mean, you kind of describe, you have F-15s up overhead fighting MiGs. You're scouting for SAM sites. I mean, talk me through like what's going through your mind when you first get eyes on a target, pulling that trigger. What did that feel like?
Well, it was a beautiful, clear morning. I could see for probably 200 miles as we came over the mountains, you know, in between Turkey and northern Iraq. And it was just gorgeous. And I remember I was thinking this the whole way, because, you know, you step out when it's dark. It's, you know, we hadn't been there that long. It was confusing. It was all new. All the local procedures to get aircraft up off the ground and where they need to go. We had to go to the tanker, of course. All that administrative stuff that most people don't know anything about. You know, we took it for granted that we would be able to do it, and we did. I was just hoping the whole time not to screw up. You know, I'm sure you get that. You know, I was a flight lead, but I wasn't leading a flight that morning because I was still very young and they had a lot more experienced guys. And I was just hoping not to screw up. You know, you got to get all the radios keyed on the secure mode right. You've got to, you know, get on the tanker and get off the tanker without causing delays. You got to always be in your correct position. There's a lot you can screw up, as you know. And I was just hoping not to screw up. And then when we came across the line, I mean, the radios just exploded. There were probably, I don't know, 60, 70 airplanes on that one frequency, common frequency. And we're always real good about, you know, radio discipline. And we have other radios that we can use to talk to each other. But the main frequency just exploded because nobody, with the exception of maybe one of the colonels, had any combat time. He was a lieutenant during Vietnam. So you have a whole bunch of guys that have been very, very well trained, but they've actually never been shot at. They've never fired a shot in anger. And, you know, that changes you when you do it or when it happens to you. So that's what I was thinking. I kept checking everything, my target, my weapons, my target, my weapons. I just didn't want to screw anything up.
And what was, when you took your first shot, like what altitude are you at? What's your relationship to the target as that's happening?
Well, that's interesting. And it's something that's real world that we don't, you know, you think about afterwards and you think, why didn't that occur to me? The Iraqis had guys sitting up on top of those 12,000 foot mountains with shoulder launched missiles. And, you know, we cruised over those mountains at 20,000 feet thinking, no, we're at 20,000 feet. We're safe. Well, actually, we were only 10,000 feet above the guys with the missiles, and they started to shoot at us, which was interesting because the first warning we had was the missiles coming up through the formations because they were infrared missiles, not radar missiles. And so we didn't have any warning of them. Like, holy cow, what was that? That was a missile. You know, it takes you a minute if you've never seen it to process it, right? And our target that first day, if I remember right, was the Mosul oil fields. Way up in northern Iraq, and we were supposed to take out the SAMs that were protecting the airfield and the oil field for the F-16s behind us, who were just carrying bombs to come in and destroy them. So that's what we did.
Jeez. All right, man. And then
it was fun.
When you came out of that, you kind of describe in the book going back to the O Club and letting loose a little bit. And I think to me, I was like, God, how great is that? You get to fly a jet and then that night you get to have a beer, because that was not the case in Afghanistan for us.
Oh, I know. And it wasn't the case for the guys down south. We didn't realize how lucky we were, you know, it was a lot like I imagined Vietnam to have been. You know, those guys would go north, they'd come back, they could all drink and party at night, and they did. And that's what we got to do. I think I put the amusing incident in the book about that colonel that I met. I wish I could find that guy today, because man, he just, you know, later in the second Gulf War, when I was a colonel, I know how I would have reacted to somebody like me. acting like that. And I kept thinking, gosh, I'm glad he didn't just shoot me in the head.
Dan, could you just give like a little context on that? Because it's a great story. I mean, you've just come out of what you've been waiting your whole life to do as a pilot. You know, like that day you see the elephant, you're at the O Club, you're drinking, and then, at the end of this, I want to know what was scarier, like that first day of combat or this colonel talking to you?
Oh, the colonel was scarier. But yeah, it was, we were all at the bar drinking, and you know, it's amazing, at least on an Air Force base, a fighter base, how quickly all the non-combat guys disappear whenever there's any kind of shooting going on. And in the, you know, the Air Force is different from the Army in that respect, because in the Air Force, it's generally the officers that go out and get shot at and get killed, right? Because they're the ones that are flying. And the support guys, which God love them, you got to have them, but they outnumber us, you know, 95-1. There's a lot more of them than there are of us, but they all disappeared, except for this one guy who showed up in the O Club that night. And I don't know what he was thinking. I don't know why he thought that'd be a good idea to come away from his computer and go see what the animals are doing in the O Club, but he did. I think he was a major, and he had on, I don't know if he had on blues or he just had on BDUs, you know, but he wasn't wearing a flight suit. And in our world, if you're not wearing a flight suit, well, who cares? And he walked in, and we were all wearing our vests. We had to take all the other stuff off that we fly in, but we were all wearing our vests with our pistols in it, because, you know, it's first day of combat. Nobody knows what's going to happen next. And nobody knows when we might get scrambled to go again. And we didn't really have an armory set up. So we're wearing the weapons. This guy took offense to that. And that's when he, you know, he told us in a very whiny, imperious voice to, you know, you've got to get rid of those weapons. You can't wear a weapon in an O Club. And I think he got a resounding round of fuck offs and everything. And one of our majors told him if he didn't leave, you know, they were going to cut off his testicles and shove him down his throat. And that's when he went and got this colonel. And that's when the colonel came back in. And, you know, I'm sure he looked around and said, I really don't want to do this, you know, to himself, but he kind of had to, since this major got him into it. And that's when he, you know, when he gave me the lecture about, you know, listen, you little shit, I had 200 and something missions over North Vietnam, you know, a snot-nosed puppy like you doesn't impress me at all. Now, you know, give me the freaking gun. And I said, sir, I'm not going to do that. It's my weapon. I can't give it up. And to his credit, you know, I remember him looking away, taking a deep breath, thinking, I'd really like to just cut this punk's head off. But he didn't. And he looked back at him and he goes, all right, well, then just take it and get the hell out of here and don't come back with a weapon on. So anyway, it was a good story. He had to be there, but
oh God, but that had to have been worse than the combat that day, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it was, you know, I kept thinking the day is over, you know, the day is over. All day long, I kept thinking, well, that was it. When I came back across the line, I kept thinking, I'm safe. And then I think I put it in the book about the Eagles coming down after some Turkish F-104s that decided it would be a good chance, it would be a good practice to run intercepts on our strike package. Like, what kind of idiot are you? And then the NATO Patriot battery that was set to automatic, and it sensed our jamming pods and shot at us. You know, and then the airfield, the base defense Patriots did the same thing. They shot at us. And I kept thinking every time, well, that was it. Couldn't get any worse. So there I am in the O Club thinking, well, that's it. It couldn't get any worse. And I come face to face with a very irate colonel.
Oh, God. All right. Well, if we jump forward then to post 9/11, I think I read you got 4 DFCs total in your time in uniform.
Yeah.
Could you take me through one of the hairier moments in your post 9/11 fight? You can choose it. You know, I know in the book, the one where you're in the sandstorm brownout sounds pretty crazy, but if there's another one that comes to mind, take it anyway. But like, you're a little bit older at that time. What was how had you changed? And what was that fight like?
You mean one of the DFC stories?
Yeah. Or one of the more dangerous ones that you found yourself in, but I assume that it would align with your DFCs.
Yeah, the one about the sands, the brownout and running out of fuel, and you know, I gathered up, I think 12 or 11 other F-16s, and we landed like 1 minute before the only remaining airbase in Southwest Asia closed down for sand, and that was at the end of a 10 and a half hour combat mission. you know, that's in the book, and to be honest, when I talk about it now, I keep thinking, how did I live through that? One of the other ones was one day we were going out as 6 ships then, and the F4s were all gone by 2003. We're all F-16 Block 50s, which is a version of the F-16 made to detect and kill SAMs. We had some cool pods and some other things. And so we go up as sometimes as 6 ships, and then we would split up and we would go hunting mobile SAMs, or we'd go, you know, somebody said, hey, there's a radar here that you need to kill. Or sometimes it was just normal strike stuff, you know, a bridge or a line of tanks or whatever. And in this particular day, we'd already split up, and I just had one wingman with me. And the giant voice, you know, enters my helmet from space or wherever. And it's the commanding general for, you know, flight ops in Southwest Asia. And they have some emergency tasking. And it turns out that they'd picked up from space or guys on the ground or something. With what they said was a line of tanks moving south out of Baghdad. Okay, it's Highway 1, you know, that goes from Baghdad to Kuwait. And it was a solid overcast. I mean, below about 5,000 feet. It was just solid. It was one of those days where it's nice and flat above, you know, but the tops of the clouds, you know, are for as far as you could see, there's just no holes. And they wanted me to go down through the clouds and do a recce run of these tanks. And I'm thinking, this is exactly the sort of thing I teach people never to do. You know, you never go down through the clouds or a hole in the clouds if there are bad guys down there. But they were adamant. They said, we've got to know, because it may be a counteroffensive, which it turned out to be, but they didn't know that. So I came in, I looked at the map, and I came in. There's a big lake west of Baghdad, and I figured, well, there won't be any SAMs over the lake. I went 30 or 40 miles out, and I let down on radar altimeter and infrared and all the other crap we had, so that I could come into Baghdad from the west over the lake, because I thought I'd be safe there. And I was. It was a good idea. And I think I broke out at maybe 800 feet. And I dropped down to maybe 300 feet as the weather, you know, starts slanting down. And I could pick them up on my air-to-ground radar. I could see the vehicles on the road, and it wasn't a line of tanks. It was like a whole gaggle of tanks. And so I am just screaming. I am right below the Mach, you know, maybe 550 miles an hour over this lake. And I hit the road, and you would get this, because, you know, you would understand, but I mean, picture a black background and then all of a sudden multicolored explosions everywhere. Okay, it was every piece of AAA and every shoulder launch SAM and everything else. What I had found was one of the divisions of the Republican Guard. I don't remember which one it was, maybe the Medina division, but it wasn't a line of tanks. It was a whole division moving out. And when they heard me or saw me or picked me up coming screaming in off the lake at 200 feet, they opened up with everything that they could. And I thought, I'm a dead man. I am a dead man. Fortunately, my pod reacted automatically, and I put out I had 120 chaff and flare bundles. I had cluster bombs under my wings. And I remember thinking, shit. I actually said, shit. Then I nosed over and flicked over. We had real good systems in the F-16. I flicked over to air to ground like that. And I just put the pipper that we used to, you know, to drop things on right on the road in the middle of all those vehicles. And I hit the button, and the CBUs came off, and I just screamed over the road. And as I come screaming over the road, they detonated behind me, and the whole sky behind me lit up. I thought they hit me with something, you know, and they're still shooting as I did this. And it was, you know, the whole thing lasted less than 30 seconds, but it scared the hell out of me. You know, I remember rocketing past, and I'm down to maybe 100 feet now because of the weather. What? And I just zoomed up through the clouds once I was well past the road. And I remember breaking through sunlight, right? It's all dark and hellish below, and then all of a sudden, sunlight and blue sky, and I realized how hard I was breathing. And, you know, like you, I don't get too excited when I fly, because you get paid to be calm. But that particular 30 seconds was really, really bad. And it turns out, and this is purely by accident, I wish I could take credit for it, but my cluster bombs hit the lead vehicles and slowed the column down long enough for our guys on the ground to do whatever it is they were going to do. They wanted to give me credit for tactical situational awareness. And I said, I just really just hit the button because I wanted to go faster and I needed to get rid of the bombs, and they were pissing me off because they were shooting at me. But anyway, you know, it worked out well. And I remember when I zoomed up and got a hold of them and told them, they asked me to go back. And I said, it's not safe, you know, down there. I told you what it is. It's a division, a full division, an armored division. And that's really all I can tell you. And me going back isn't gonna do anything else. Besides, they're all pissed off and waiting for me now. So
Shit.
Yeah, that was a bad 30 seconds.
So Dan, you were a flight of 6, but you went down on your own?
I wasn't going to drag a wingman down there. There was no need to do surveillance and reconnaissance. You know, we called it road reconnaissance. I thought it was bad enough that they were sending me down. I wasn't going to risk him. He was orbiting up above. He had me locked up the whole time on his air-to-air radar. So if anything had happened to me, he would have sung out and let anybody know. But you know, there was no reason, and it's a good decision because if he couldn't have flown with me because of the weather, and you don't fly close in combat anyway because that's just stupid. The only way to do it would be to have him in trail of me, and they would have really let him have it.
They would have let him up.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how a lot of guys in Vietnam got whacked, because they were still flying like they did in Korea in World War II, and it's usually the guys on down the line that got hit, not the leader. And I wasn't going to do this to this kid.
Damn. So I'm sure you've had many near-death experiences. It sounds like that's one of them. But that day when you landed, you kind of alluded to this with the Gulf War experience, where you're just in the moment, you realize things are crazy, but then I think you hop out of the aircraft and things are calmed down for a minute, and you realize just how insane it was. What did that feel like coming out of that day where you're like, I can't even believe I'm here still?
Yeah, it was later. And see, the good thing about that war was we were in the South this time. We were in Saudi Arabia, country I hope to never see again. And it's a good hour and 15-minute flight from where we were to the border. And you have to air refuel coming out because of the distance and because we always used up all of our fuel. So there's some time to calm down and defrag yourself, you know. And so I had an hour and 15 minutes and air refueling and a long, slow ride home to kind of, you know, get over it. But still, until you get out of the airplane, you know, and you shut down, you walk away, you're not really done, right? In any kind of military aircraft. And we went through the debriefing and all that, and there was no booze to take solace in. And I came back to my palatial quarters, and I remember laying down on the rack, the metal rack that we slept on, and staring up at the springs. You know, it was a bunk bed, staring up at the springs and thinking, what the hell just happened? You know, and I didn't really have time until then to relive it in my head. And as you've done yourself, at some situation like that, you're just reacting. You know, some situations you can plan for. You've got, you know, you can look at something happening and go, hey, tactically, we're going to do this and this and this. This was one of those situations where you just react. You know, unfortunately, your training and the airplane take over, and you walk away from it.
Yeah. You just mentioned the debrief that you did, and we would do debriefs, but they were not hour-long debriefs the way you describe them. Was that pretty common, like a couple-hour pre-flight discussion, mission brief, and then post-flight for 2 hours plus?
No, not in combat, for a couple reasons. First of all, nobody's getting graded on it except whether you live or die, unlike peacetime stuff. Second, we tended to fly with, we call them formed four ships. So you would generally get the same wingman and flight lead.
Yeah.
And as a flight lead, mission commander type, I would lead the same 4 guys, or the same 3 other guys, sometimes the same 7 other guys. You know, we'd fly in groups of 4. And so after a day or two of that, they know what to expect from you. You know what to expect from them. And you don't have to go through all the administrative crap that you do in peacetime. Besides, a lot of the peacetime briefing is eaten up by mandatory briefing items, you know, that you have to do.
Yeah.
And in combat, you know, it's really, hey, you know, this is when we step out. This is when we start. Here's the lineup card with the frequencies. And you spend all of your time talking about the tactics. You know, and all of my time, meaning, you know, we would typically spend maybe 30 minutes talking about, all right, these are the weapons we have today. This is how we're going to employ it. Or we might just say, hey, we're going to do it just like we did yesterday, only from this direction. And if you're with the same guys, you can get away with that. The debriefings generally consisted of anything really big or stupid that anybody did, which almost never happened, because like you, we were all professionals and nobody really did anything dumb unless they were guests. They were colonels down from headquarters trying to get a combat sortie or something. There were a few of those, but we would concentrate on, all right, we hit 6 out of 8 today. What happened to the other 2? So that when we went out the next day, we'd get 8 out of 8. It was all confined to real world tactical stuff.
Yeah. Can we talk about your call sign? So I think it was 2 dogs. If you're able to share, because a couple of the other guys I've talked to had pretty tame call signs. So I don't know where on the spectrum yours falls, but just curious where it came from.
Well, I'm proud that it didn't come from doing anything stupid in the airplane. I was lucky, in 20 years, I can't recall ever do anything stupid in an airplane. Now on the ground in the bar is a different thing, but at least in flight, everybody screws up once in a while. And of course I screwed up, but I never did anything noteworthy enough to get a call sign out of it, like scratch, guys that would drag the tail along the runway, or, there was always a boomer, somebody that goes supersonic inadvertently and blows all the windows out of downtown Atlanta. I didn't do it. I never did anything like that. 2 dogs. I'll give you the tame version because my mother might see this. I get, I have some Indian blood in me. And when I am out in the sun, I turn this kind of dark brown, reddish color. I look like an Indian, that and my big nose. So in Germany, when I was a lieutenant, we used to go to Spain. This was before the First War. We'd go to Spain twice a year for 30 days. Such a good time to get all of our bombing requirements, because you couldn't do it in Germany because the weather sucked. And we did a lot of pool time, and I got really dark and really brown. And so the tame version of the call sign is they named me 2 dogs after the Indian joke, 2 dogs screwing in the night. How did I get named, Father? How did the Indian boy get his name? So that's the tame version of it. And then in the Air Force, in fighter squadrons, if you have the same call sign over 3 tours in different commands, or if you use it in combat, it's yours forever. You can't be renamed. Otherwise, every time you go to a base, if you can be renamed. And fortunately, that was my first tour. I did the Gulf War. I'd flown with it in combat, so I was always 2 dogs, thereafter.
Nice. Was there anything you carried while you flew that was like a good luck charm, talisman, something like that you had to have with you?
My wife's panties.
Stop. For real?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's the best one I've ever heard.
Pair of red panties, and I had them up in my we had an arm pocket on her flight suit, and I'd stick them up there.
Oh man.
They were very small because she's very petite, so it was a good thing. Yeah, a pair of red panties.
Awesome. All right, I can't top that. Just in the interest of time, just two more questions, Dan. I'll let you get back to life here. There was a quote from the book that I thought was really great. I want to read it and get your thoughts on it. I've definitely felt this, but haven't been able to put it into words this way. But you describe how you've got 30 other men who survived the same screening, years of training, constant attrition. They're generally priceless to be around. Personal likes and dislikes aside, you know that you can count on them with your life. They die for you. There's no real equivalent to that. Man, that rings so true for me as a veteran. Like, when did you realize that, and what does that mean to you?
I realized that subjectively in training, to some degree, but the first time I went across the line, like we talked about earlier, I was flying as a wingman that day. Like I said, I was only a lieutenant, and the F4 guy with me was he's maybe 8-10 years older than I am, but he was one of those guys and you get to that point when you fly, right? When you haven't seen everything, but you know that anything that happens, you can deal with it. Yeah, it's a great feeling to have as a pilot when you go, hey, I'm experienced enough that I'm not cocky about it, but I know that if anything happens, I can deal with it. He was one of those guys. His call sign was Orca because he looked like a big whale, but he was completely unflappable. He was a big, ugly, great strong, sturdy kind of a guy. And I got temporarily turned around after my first evasion from an SA-2, and I lost sight of him. I couldn't find him. I'm in enemy territory, and I don't want to talk on the radio because, I don't want to add to the confusion. And I remember that sinking feeling you get for a few seconds when you realize, holy crap, I'm all alone out here. And all of a sudden I heard his voice, and he said, look at your left 7 o'clock for a mile, a little bit high. And I hadn't even told him I was lost, or not lost, but disoriented. He could tell, And when we came back, we went to the club, we drank, and I remember sitting there arm in arm with these guys. We weren't talking about it, but we knew, hey, if anything had ever gone wrong, these are guys that would do anything they could for you. As well as I do, and this is something I don't think most people get. In that situation, in a fight, you're not fighting for your country or the government or anything else. You're fighting for the guys, on both sides of you. It may come down to all the rest of that crap later, but not crap, but stuff later. But in the moment when it's your butt out there and people are trying to kill you, you're fighting for the guys that are there with you and nobody else.
Yeah, for sure. I think I know the answer to this, but I try to ask everybody this one question. When you look back on that time, all the near-death experiences and the craziness, would you do it again?
Absolutely. I would. And it isn't just because, I got into it way back in the back of your head. You want to do it because it's patriotic, because you want to serve your country, but you're also doing it because it's a tremendous challenge. And you figure at age 25 or whatever, if I can master this, then I can master anything. And one of the biggest things that I'm happy for now at this point in life, and I'm sure you are too, is that I haven't had anything to prove to anybody but me for 30 years. And that's something people that have never done it don't really understand. That's why you see guys go off and have midlife crises and do stupid stuff, but I never will, not like that, and probably you won't either, because we've got nothing to prove. You never have to look at yourself in the mirror and think, would I measure up? Because you know that you already have.
And then selfish question, last one. I've got 3 boys. The oldest is 13. He loves flying. He wanted me to ask you, if you weren't flying an F-16, what would you fly?
Well, I flew the F-20. I was in the F-22 program for a while too. You mean any airplane or modern airplanes?
Any.
Oh, if I had my
just
choice.
Just somebody who just loves flying. If you could do any, what would it be?
Oh, you mean right now, just have an airplane to fly? If the F-16 would still be close if I could afford the $70,000 an hour tag to take it up. But I've always loved the Corsair, the World War II Chance Vought Corsair. And if I could have an airplane, I think it would be the Corsair, just because it looks, manly with those wings and big 50 caliber machine guns. I think it'd be a blast to fly.
That's awesome. All right. Well, Dan, I won't take up any more of your time. I really appreciate it. These are some great stories, especially the good luck charm that you carried with you.
Yeah. Well, it obviously worked, right?
Hey, you're here to talk about it. So I think
I have a picture of it somewhere. I was refueling, and actually the boomer asked me, he said, so what do you do for good luck? And I remember as soon as I disconnected, I hung out there for a second and I pulled my wife's panties out of my pocket and held them up. He took a picture and sent it to me.
That's great.
I really wish I could find that picture because it's a great picture.
That's a classic. That's awesome. What are you working on now? Because you got several novels, Red Viper Pilot. What's coming next for you?
Well, Vengeance came out in August, and it's about the Yamamoto mission, the fighter pilots that shot down Yamamoto. And I'm working on one right now with a new publisher, St. Martin's Press. And it should come out late next year, maybe about this time next year. And it's about a Marine officer who escaped from Corregidor by swimming across Manila Bay and then tried to get to Australia on a boat, got captured, and spent the rest of the war in a POW camp. Great story. I've got his manuscript. His daughter's been real helpful. So it's really amazing stuff. Every day I look forward to doing it because I find myself enthralled. So it should be a good book. That's great. I'm so glad to hear it. And I'll make sure that people can find you where you're at on social media and your books. So yeah, and thanks, tell them if they do that, I will always respond. It may take me a few minutes or a few days, but I'll always respond. And if they like any of the books, please do reviews. They're very, very helpful, and they'll keep me writing. If they don't like the books, don't say anything.
Don't say anything.
Say anything.
You got it. Thanks, Dan. Have a good one.
You bet, Ryan. Thank you.